Today we welcome our guest, German historian Karl Шльоґель, who is well known in Germany for his numerous books. He is specialized in East European and Russian history. He has been working about Stalinism, Russian modernism, Russian diaspora and dissident movement, cultural history of East European cities, and many other interesting topics. Karl Шльоґель studied philosophy and sociology, East European history and Slavic studies at the Free University in Berlin. And already as a young man he started traveling through Eastern Europe and what was at that time the territory of the Soviet Union. He also participated in various left students' movements and was one of the first in his generation to discover Eastern Europe when Eastern Europe was still behind the Iron Curtain. In 1982, he studied in Lomonosov Moscow State University, and later again and again he visited Russia, Ukraine, other countries of Eastern Europe, and this kind of very intimate relationship with Eastern Europe has become inspiration for his work. Professor Шльоґель was professor for East European history at the Constance University in Germany from 1990 to 1994. And in 1995 he became professor for East European history at the Viadrina University in Frankfurt an der Oder, which is a new, was at that time a new university, a joint German-Polish project established to create a new sort of transnational elite in Eastern Europe. And since 2013 he is professor emeritus of this university. Professor Шльоґель has a long list of publications, books, many of them translated in other languages, including also Russian, Polish, and other East European and West European languages. I just will mention some of them because the full list is rather long. So from the point of view of our today's discussion, probably such books as Peterburg, das Laboratorium der Moderne, Peterburg, the Laboratory of the Modernism, 1909-1921 should be mentioned, Promenade in Yalta und andere Städtebilder. The boardwalk in Yalta and other city portraits. Im Raum lesen wir die Zeit über Zivilisationsgeschichte und Geopolitik. We read Time in Space, about history of civilizations and geopolitics, das russische Berlin, Ostbahnhof Europas, the Russian Berlin, Eastern Railway Station of Europe, Terror und Traum, Terror and Dream, Moscow 1939, and his newest book, which was published just some days ago, entitled in Kyiv, Українські лекціони, Decision in Kyiv, Ukrainian lessons. You can see here the copy of this book. There are many things I would like to mention in this introduction, because for me, when I started to learn German, the books of Professor Шльоґель were kind of very important reading, and my entrance into the German language academic discourse about Eastern Europe. But I will probably leave now the floor to our guest and speaker, and I hope for very inspiring and interesting evening. Thank you very much, Professor Шльоґель, and thank you everybody for coming.
Добрый вечер всем. Большое спасибо за то, что вы приехали на таком великолепном, чудесном, летном, бабе-летном вечере. И я хочу... мы договорились на том, что доклад или выступление будет на английском языке, потому что у меня есть впечатление, что mainstream language здесь, на этом биеннале и в Киевской школе это английский язык, и вторая причина в том, что потом почти большинство литературы, которую я прочитал насчет украинского модернизма 20-х, 30-х годов, Парижская школа и так далее, я мог найти главным образом в английском, в англоязычном литературе. Очень странно, но мне очень жаль, что я не способен достаточно хорошо читать по-украински. Вот. Так я продолжаю на английском. First of all, I would like to thank Tatiana, Tatiana, thank you for your very kind introduction. And I would like to thank very much for the invitation by the organizers of this Biennale of the School of Kyiv. And I accepted this invitation because, first of all, the subject was interesting for me. And when I saw the subject landscapes, cultural landscapes, the analysis of cultural landscapes, I agreed, and the second reason, of course, is to come back to Kyiv. The title I announced was Getting the Picture, Ukraine and European Modernism. I personally would now prefer to reformulate it, and the aim of my speech now is to remap, or to start to remap our map of the cultural landscape of the 20th century in Europe, including the contributions of the Ukrainian culture. So the title would sound more properly remapping the cultural landscape after falling apart of the Soviet Empire and after the emergence of the Ukrainian nation and Ukrainian culture. I have to say this is one of my last stops before entering and going back to Germany to write. I have been last month in Lviv. There was a meeting between German and Ukrainian historians and writers, and it was I had a great impression from Lviv again. Then I was last week in Moscow, the anniversary of the German Historical Institute, and I was making a trip to Rostov-na-Donu just to see what's going on the Russian side of the border. It's only 40, 50 kilometers to the border. And of course, Rostov is a huge and powerful city. At first glance, you don't see that there is war, but there is war. And especially, I went to the railway station to get, how is it called, marshrutka to Donetsk. And they told me, yes, you can go to Donetsk. There are even no controls on the border. I mean, it's open and it's so clear that the Russian side does not recognize the integrity of the Ukrainian territory. So I did not go to Donetsk, but it was quite interesting experience. I'm happy to be back in Kyiv. First of all, not first of all, but you know, it's a so beautiful city, one of the great and most beautiful cities in Europe. This landscape, the valley, the Жилой Massif on the left bank, the golden domes, and the vivid and the atmosphere of the city. It's almost a Mediterranean city. But the second reason is, of course, I did not come in as a tourist looking around, visiting museums. I came to understand what's going on and to get a feeling on the ground what in Ukraine will happen. And in advance, I have to say, being in Lviv, being in Kharkiv, being in Kiev, you do not have the feeling that you are in cities of a failing state. Failing state rhetoric is the rhetoric of the Kremlin and of some people in the West. But these are cities, in my impression, very concerned. Everybody knows that the situation is very serious, that there will be a harsh winter, but it's a kind of mood of self-discipline and being concerned, which impressed me very, very much, I have to say. I have to thank the organizers that they have produced this wonderful book of Kyiv. I knew already a lot about Kyiv. There's a chapter on Kyiv as metropolis, but I have learned a lot from this book, and I have been in the last days on some spots and sites which are very important and which I did not understand, including this place, this site. I have to say, when I was yesterday first time here, I was perplexed. And I have to make a compliment to the architect of this building. I know there were some fights around the environment about Lvovskaya Ploshta, but this space, the creation of this space, I would like to compare it with what Mies van der Rohe has created in Berlin in the National Gallery. This is a great architecture advancement. It's a pioneer work of the second modernity in the late 60s, 70s, 80s. I know that it has been built in a very long period. So, I have to say to you that I'm not a historian, an expert of Ukrainian history. I was socialized in academic terms as most and the majority of students and scholars in East European history in the West and in Germany. That means Russia-centered, Moscow-centered, capital-centered, and with an almost professional disinterest in the developments of the so-called periphery. So it's not, this is just the case. It has to do with intellectual cultures, this kind of Russo-centrism and Moscow-centrism, and this is the perspective of the empire. But yesterday, Vasil made a very interesting remark that sometimes it's important to switch and to change the perspective to understand even the center much better. So if you have a look from the so-called periphery, from the borderlands back to the center, you will maybe better understand what's going on now in the center. Maybe it would be useful to give to make some remarks before entering the subject, how and why so late some of my colleagues, including myself, did not understand what's happening and what is the Ukraine. Mark von Hagen, who is an American historian, an expert, a great expert, he has written in '95 a crucial article in Russian Review, Does Have Ukraine a History? This was the self-reflection of a historian, of a prominent American historian, asking himself why he never dealt especially with Ukraine history as such. And I have to say, I have asked this question much later, I would say even after the shock of the Crimea annexation and the so-called Ukrainian crisis. I had different encounters with Ukraine. I have been in Ukraine, and I would even say I'm a veteran of traveling to Ukraine. Most of you here in this hall have not been born when I was first time in Ukraine. It was in 1966, coming from a Bavarian gymnasium close to Munich. We organized a tour to Moscow, and of course by bus we went to Mukachevo, Chop, Lviv, Kyiv, and even I remember Kharkiv. But this was traveling to Moscow, and Ukraine was the province on the way to Moscow. It was the province, or how to say, the backyard. It was a part of the Soviet Empire, and I knew the wonderful landscapes, the golden domes, etc., but it was a part of the Soviet experience. The second encounter was in my student time, when I came together with dissidents in Eastern Europe. I was in '68 in Prague and in other countries, and I had first contact with the Ukrainian community in Munich, in Schwabing, very close to the place where Stepan Bandera has been shot down by Stasziński. And at that time, in the early 70s, mid-70s, we had an encounter, and some of the Ukrainian diaspora helped us to get in contact. So I learned Petro Grigorenko, and I got in contact with Leonid Klush, and we learned to read the books of Ivan Zuba, which was very important for us as coming from the leftist, from the Marxist orientation in the student movement. So we had an encounter of the leftist student movement, the veterans of this movement, like Rudy Dutschke and Petro Grigorenko, the former Soviet Stalinist general, becoming in his late years dissident, a prominent dissident, and I would say it was a great experience, this encounter. The third encounter was in post-Soviet Ukraine. I mostly traveled from one end to the other in the Soviet Union, and in Kyiv I was just as a capital of the Soviet Republic. But after '91, I mostly have been in Russia, and only twice or three times in Odessa, in Kyiv, and and on the Crimea. You may ask why, at the end of his creative life, somebody is forced to go back to school and to reflect about what he has done in his life, writing a number of books, some of them quite influential. Why? The reason is quite easy. It is the shock of the Crimea. It is not, I have to confess, I have to admit, I did not realize what was happening in the Orange Revolution in 2004. I did not take serious what was happening in Georgia in 2008. And I was always concerned with what happened in Russia. And I was quite confident, being in the 90s, in these horrors and turbulences of falling apart of the empire and reorganizing new Russia, I was quite confident that Russia will be able to balance, to keep the balance, and to find its way. Very complicated, very, very complicated, with a lot of problems, almost unsolvable. But I had the confidence because I always admired the capacity of improvisation, of muddling through, of how to solve problems which in the West, in the highly organized societies, in the institutions of the West, could not be solved. So the aggression and the annexation of the Crimea was a shock. It was a kind of the end of this belief that Russia will find a way out of this crisis. And it was not only the Ukrainian case, it was the experience that wars back in Europe, and that my generation, I was born in '48, that my generation, which grew up under the auspices of Cold War, protected by nuclear deterrence, we never had an experience of what war looks like. We were the happy fellows of the golden age of the post-war time. And so, after the Yugoslav experience, the aggression against Ukraine was in a certain way the end of this blue sky of the golden age of post-war, the post-war generation experience. So, I was saying that Ukraine, for most of my academic milieu, was always a part of the Russian history, of the Soviet history, and the same goes for art history. I have to say, I never thought about that Alexandra Exter or Malevich had something to do with Kiev or Ukraine. Malevich I learned in Vitebsk. I have been twice in Vitebsk. And Alexandra Exter, she was for me a художница, an artist of Diaghilev, of Cubo-Futurism, but I never linked her art with the Ukrainian background. It was only the Swiss art slavicist and historian Felix Philipp Ingold in an article in the Neue Zürcher Zeitung who made a very strong piece telling us, or to me, that Soviet avant-garde, in fact, is a very mixtum compositum, a very mixed society, and that if you have to understand Soviet avant-garde of the 20s and early 30s, you have to look to other places, not only to Moscow. You have to go to Tbilisi, you have to go to Kiev, you have to go to Kharkiv, you have to go to Central Asia and other places. So it was a new and shocking experience, but it is, in a certain way, a privilege to go through crises because you are forced to learn, to start anew, and to think about things you never had thought about. So, last remark before entering, it has to do with with approach in analyzing. The period which is interesting for me and which I have dealt with in many years, in many books, is what I call the time of modernity, or die Moderne in German. This is a period which I would define between the fin de siècle, between 1890 and the early 1930s. It is the combination of the Silver Age, of the Belle Époque, of the takeoff inside the European empires. This concerns all empires, the Russian Empire, the Ottoman Empire, the Habsburg Empire, and of course Wilhelminism in Germany too. There are silver ages before the great disaster of the Great War. And in a certain way, the continuation of this blossoming culture in the 20s, the avant-garde all over Europe. This is the time frame I would like to talk about. But my way to analyze, I'm not a historian of literature, I'm not a musicologist or so, I do not talk about Schoenberg or so. I like to analyze forms and especially the surface. The surface is very important. In this way, I'm a phenomenologist. And I do not look what is behind the surfaces. I do not ask where's the essence of all these things. I'm interested in the analysis of surfaces. And if we do this in the sense of Benjamin, of Panofsky, Warburg, and others, I think we can detect, decipher, we can read the cultural context. This second element, I like a formulation to read cities, to read the texture of landscapes, of cities, because this is important. You can read the textures, the places and sites of history, because history does not take place only in time, in chronological terms, which is the mainstream in historiography, to tell the story from beginning to the end. The narrative goes through, but there's another way to tell the story, and this is to look on the site, to go to the site, to go to the place where history took place, and you can write an entirely different history. Different in the sense that it's not the consequence, the seriality, the consecutiveness, but you are telling a story which takes place simultaneously. And this is what I have done. My book on Petersburg is about Petersburg between 1910 and 20, about Berlin, Russian Berlin in the 20s, about Moscow in the year of the Great Terror in 1937. So this is also an interest for me to go to Ukrainian cities. If I want to understand in my terminology Ukrainian history, it's not only to start with Kievan Rus and going to independent Ukraine today with all the stops and intervals between Hetmanat and the first independent Ukrainian state, etc. But my way of looking and understanding and finding an interpretation and a narrative for me is to go to places and to tell the story which took place in these places. So it's a kind of, in the sense of Alexander von Humboldt, traveling, but traveling as a profession and not as entertainment. It's hard work to travel, to look, to analyze, and to reflect. Very important for me, for entering nowadays contemporary Ukraine, I have to say, was not reading Gogol or reading Shevchenko. I have to confess, I have read Shevchenko later on. I started with the young Ukrainian authors who have been translated into German. I mean, Andruchowicz, Seri Shardan, Jurko Prochasko, Zabushko, or my colleague Andrei Portnov, and others. There was obviously a new voice, a new tone, and it was easier for me to get this new sound of today's Ukraine. Now, what are the places of modernity I'm interested in and I was looking for? We had to say that Ukraine has been the place of many modernities, not only of one. If you use the term of Shmuel Eisenstadt's multiple modernities, you have the modernity of the Habsburg Empire, you have the modernity of the Russian Empire, you have the modernity of the Ottoman Empire, etc., etc. And all you find reflected on the territory of Ukraine, of today's Ukraine. The traces of different empires and of an emerging nation building on the territory of different empires. In a time of industrial takeoff, in a time of World War I, revolution, civil war, and recovery, and ending in the mid-30s in Europe in the disaster and apocalyptic processes of Stalinism, I mean especially on the territory of Ukraine, Holodomor, and of National Socialism in the western part of Europe. Where do I read the modernity in the texture of cities? You may ask probably where is the drama, where is the movie which is reflecting this? No, I do start not with high culture, I start with basics, that means with structures, infrastructures. To understand the functioning of the emerging urban culture and the basis of everything, of гражданское общество, of civil society, you have to look at the infrastructures and the social processes of urbanization. And so I'm interested in railways, I'm interested in bridges, I'm interested in ports, I'm interested in hospitals, in the construction of gymnasiums, academies, schools, prisons, barracks, hotels, department stores, and of course, where everything comes together in the production of public spaces. Public spaces are in a certain way the hubs of the emerging society and civil society, and I would say up to date, one of the big hubs of civil society, the urban environment where the self-consciousness of a society, of the urban people articulates in Europe is of course Khreshchatyk and Maidan. And it's a kind of a genius loci, I would say, that all happened on this place, on this grand place, And I would say even after 45, it is one of the greatest reconstruction projects of a European city. I admire this urban and public space which has become the stage of the revolution of dignity. So I'm interested in these material things, in material culture, and then I go to other things, to forms, to the facade, to the repertoire of theaters, of cinemas, of novels, etc., etc., all things we identify with culture. So I cannot give a list now of what I'm interested in especially, but I can make a few remarks related to some cities I know, some I do not know, and especially I have to say, which is a great, great lacune or blind spot in the perception of a historian of Russia, of Ukraine, that most of us do not go out of town. Most of us do not go, I mean, exploring and reflecting in a sense of historiography, go to villages. But the tragedies of some countries happened not only in the cities, but on the villages. So, few remarks. I start. It's not a hierarchy and not a priority, but I start just to express what I mean with Lviv, Lemberg. Of course, you know the myth of Galicia. This is a multicultural, multi-confessional, etc., space. And there's an exhibition now in Vienna and in Krakow about the myth of Galicia. And you know, I have not to tell you that it was really a unique European place at the corners of three empires, and with a very specific mélange, a mixture of cultures, languages, classes, confessions, etc. And I would say, and you know the personnel, you know the milieus, the persons who represent this culture, from Martin Buber, Josef Wittlin, Lesia Ukrainka, Ivan Franko, and others. It was really a unique place, related, this Ukrainian city is related to Europe, to the European capitals, to Vienna, to Berlin. Alexander Granach went to Berlin. Les Kurbas, who was in Galicia, who started there, he had links to Max Reinhardt and to Piscator, the stages of Berlin. And for me, the takeoff of this city in the early 20th century is represented in what I call Nowy Świat. If I go to this residential area in Lviv, it is one of the most impressive, of course, very wealthy, even luxury residential areas of European cities, architects like Zacharewicz, Lipinski, and others. So in Lviv, you have a Ukrainian city which is linked, which is the neutral European city linked to other metropolis. And I would say even Andrei Sheptytsky, I read in the book about the Paris School of Ukrainian Painting that Andrei Sheptytsky, the Archbishop, was the sponsor of young Ukrainian artists going to Paris, and in the 30s it was a lot of Ukrainian artists coming back to Lviv at that time and got the support of Andrzej Szeptycki, who is in certain circles a person rather under doubt. But he has been a great figure of the Ukrainian culture in that time. Another place, of course, very close to the German horizon is Czernowitz, which I have not to explain with this German language Jewish culture had linked to Berlin and to Romania and also to Austria. Another place, Yuzovka, Stalino, Donetsk, where I have been last year, Hiroyaki Kuroyima, an American colleague of mine, has published the best book on, of a foreign historian on Donbass, and it's published in Ukrainian, I have seen. He called the Donbass as the most European place, which sounds very strange in the light of today's development, but he had in mind that it was a kind of melting pot. People coming from all corners of the former empire, the Russian Empire, but not only. There had been communities of Swiss, British, Scottish, German, etc., etc. So it would be easy to show the linkings and the networks in which the Donbass even existed in that time, second half of 19th century and early 20th century. I have a person, or found two persons. One is the founder of the museum, Jawornicki, I would say, I guess, and Krasnoselski, the architect who is from the old school, the classical school, but he was building the Univermark in Stalino, and who represents in a certain way this tradition of modernity of the early 20th century and even after the revolution. Odessa, I have not to talk. You know much better about the importance of Odessa as a European place, as a Porto Franco, as a port city, and if you go, you can read the texture of this boom town in the 10s and in the 20s, in the architecture. I mean, the Opera House, I mean, the Brodsky Synagogue, the Hotel Londinska, etc., etc. Concerning Kharkov, this is a specific case, I would say, because if you go out of the railway station, you have a concentration of power in a public space which is almost incomparable. I have in mind the administration building of the Yuzhny Железная Doroga of the late 19th century and the Glavny Pochtamt by Mordvinov. And it shows that you are arriving in a city where a very important chapter of modern culture and especially modern city, town planning and architecture has been written. You know the city much better than me. This unbelievable planning of Novi Kharkov, of the former Ploshad Dzержинskого, the Держпром compound which is unique in Europe. I know only one place comparable to Gazprom or Gazprom. This is the Rockefeller Center in New York, which was also a great project in the New Deal period of Rockefeller in the 30s, and which was admired by most Soviet architects and city planners. But the Kharkiv project was 10 years earlier, and it is very important to know that for people informed in Europe and in America, they had to go to Kharkiv to see Gazprom, Kharkiv Traktorny Zavod, the different clubs, and as you know, there was a project for the Operny Theater, the design by Vesnin, and what they would have created, you can see today in Rostov-na-Donu, where they have built an unbelievable, not the Vesnins, but Gelufreich and Schuko, an unbelievable theater complex. So I would say Kharkiv is one of the centers of the modernity, of the Soviet modernity in the Soviet Ukraine, and it is, I would say, it has to be integrated into a history of the Ukraine in the 20th century, knowing that simultaneously happened around the city the most terrible things. And you know that the Kharkiv area has been hit mostly and severely by the Holodomor. And for Kharkiv, there is also a person who represents the continuity between Silver Age and modernity. In my view, this is Beketov, the great architect. So now Kyiv. Kyiv for me is, of course, starting from the very beginning. It's the Vatican of the Pravoslavny Mir. It's the center of pilgrimage, etc., etc. But I have to say, Kyiv is for me the non-imperial metropolis. It is a city where do not have the large prospects, magistrals, avenues characteristic for imperial cities, Petersburg, even Paris, Vienna, Moscow. The natural landscape and the relief of Kyiv is entirely different. It does not allow imperial gestures. And this, in my view, allowed to create Kyiv as a city of, I would say, of общество, of the society or the civil society, but not only, I have in mind not only activists of civil society in contemporary sense, I mean the class of the bourgeoisie, I mean industrialists, businessmen, the third element, intellectuals, the free professions, media, etc. And if you would like to define, as I'm not a professional knowing Kyiv, but the general type for me, besides the golden domes, etc., is the individual house, the villa, the bank, the hotel, and the individual of the society, and personalities like Tereshchenko, the villas of Tereshchenko, the museums today, I have seen some of them. This represents for me the spirit of, the civil spirit of the Ukrainian capital. So the main place representing the spirit is for me Krещатик, as I tried to explain. Concerning, I have to finish? No? I have 5 or 10 minutes. No, if I do not address the questions you would like to discuss, or you would like to raise, we can discuss afterwards, and maybe I'm entirely wrong with what I'm defining as the subject of interest for you. Now, coming to special cultural segments, which I know, or I tried to get to know, as I have mentioned already, I did not find much literature in our Western Hemisphere, and it has to do, obviously, with this absence of the Ukrainian segment disappearing behind the avant-garde, behind the Silver Age, etc. And only in the last time there is going on a differentiation and I would not say ethnicization, but telling the local story and backgrounds of the avant-garde. Some of the authors I would like to mention. One is Selim Magomedov, who he is not among us. He died last year, whom I admire very much. The great historian of architecture of the Soviet Union. I have in mind the catalogs of the great exhibitions in New York and in Paris, and I think in Kharkiv and in Kyiv also the avant-garde in Ukrainian avant-garde in Paris in the interwar time. I have in mind the catalogs of exhibitions and the studies about Boris Kosarev from Kharkiv, studies of John Bolt, and some architect historians from Kharkiv, Tatiana Rudenko, Miroslava Mudrak, and others. All I know about the Ukrainian avant-garde in the 10s and 20s I took from these authors. And you can find it in different areas, in theater, film, literature, architecture, etc. And I apologize that it's like telling now the knowledge of a schoolboy. You are all experts and familiar with much more with the backgrounds, the genealogy of the Ukrainian culture in the 20th century. But for me, as coming from far away, I would say there are people like Alexander Dovzhenko, of course, and Dziga Vertov. There was a beautiful festival of Ukrainian films 1 month ago in Berlin, showing Zemlya and all these famous movies. And it's very important that they, of course, worked and developed their ideas in this European network. Dovzhenko working for a certain period in Berlin at the embassy, Dziga Vertov traveling, of course. So they worked in the all-European network. Theater, I have to confess that I did not know who is Les Kurbas. I was with my students 10 years ago in Solovki, and along the canal zone of Bielomor Canal. And there is a place, an execution site, Sandomur. And the friends of Memorial have established their memorial site. And as I got to know, Les Kurbas has been killed in Sandermoor, in the canal zone. Les Courbas, as far as I know from reading now, is deeply is coming from this background in Galicia or Volhynia. His first steps on the stage have been made there. Then he went to Kyiv and finally to Kharkiv. And he was also, of course, in the European network. I have in mind the early experimental theater of Max Reinhardt of 1910. He was staging famous dramatists of the time, like Georg Kaiser and Toller. He was influenced by Gordon Craig, Piscator, and others. And it is important to say that he had his immediate relation to the European scene, and not everything went through Meyerhold and via Moscow. This is, I think, important. And if you go through the curriculum vita of many of the artists, Vadim Meller, I learned only from the catalogs of the exhibition. Vadim Meller, he was doing his study in Munich, Dresden, and Paris, I think. Or looking at the ballet scene, there's a gymnasium at the theater, the gymnasium where Serge Liffard was doing his first steps in the gymnasium. And in the National History Museum, you can find the, what is it called? The costume of the ballet dancer of Serge Liffard. He made his way with Sergei Diaghilev to Paris, and his works, choreographies, you can still see on the stages in Stuttgart or in Berlin or in Paris. Vadim Meller, Serge Liffard, of course, Bronislava Nijinská, the sister of Václav Nijinsky. To talk about literature, I do not dare, because I do not know really. I have never read Chwilowy, who was close to Mayakovsky, but it seems to me that these artists and this culture of the Ukrainian Renaissance of the 20s and the early 30s has to be, at least in Germany and in our community of historians, have to be reworked. So I'm coming to finish. I tried to talk about this period. You can call it life and death of the Ukrainian modernity in this period of takeoff and the massacres, the Holodomor and the massacres of the national intelligentsia in 1935, during the Great Terror in 1937, and not to speak about what happened then, but which is a new and other chapter when Ukraine became ground zero of German occupation and the politics of annihilation and exploitation. Coming to an end, I have to say I was visiting some of the places of the School of Kiev yesterday and today, and I had an encounter with Malevich, with a reborn and reactivated Malevich in one of the galleries on the Pečersky Lavra. I had also encounter with Malevich in the exhibition, which is in the installation, which is in the National Museum of Art. and which is very interesting, and which I would recommend you to go, because the hall close to the installation is dedicated to Ukrainian intellectuals, artists. There are 12 portraits of Ukrainian intellectuals and artists. And if you look at these portraits, if you look at these faces, the profile, the physiognomy of these people, in the portrait of Petritsky and other brilliant painters, you can recognize the spirit of the time, that they have been integral part of the intellectual culture of Europe. So I would like to say, going back to Germany, that people have to go to Kyiv, to Kharkiv, to other places, if they want to understand and if they want to get a complete cartography of European culture, at least in the 20th century. But they should come not only to see the history of this culture, but to enter this vivid artistic scene, the milieus, the institutions, the NGOs, and to get an idea of what's going on. And if it sounds cynical, it does not. I do not want to. I'm not a cynic. But I would say crises are sometimes a chance for becoming inventive, to rethink, to be stimulated, to be provoked, to rethink things which you have never thought about. So it is a chance to go to Kyiv and other places, and Tim Snyder last year at the end of the conference correctly said, yes, this is a place to be. There has been a republication of articles of Josef Roth a couple of months ago, where this brilliant journalist and writer of the Habsburg Galicia, coming from Brody, was writing a piece, a short feuilleton about Ukrainomania in Berlin in the 20s. I would like to say that it would be good to have a Ukrainomania, and not only always to talk about crises, failing states, destabilization. Everybody has a possibility to take part in creating stability, in engaging. And it's not only artists, it's also business, it's banks, and last but not least, a recommendation. It would be a great step forward to open the sky, to bring young people to Ukraine. Not only to trust in Ukrainian international airways with high prices. You should open the sky, the Ukrainian sky, for easy jet, for with air, etc., etc. And to create normality, to create exchange, just to go 2 hours from Berlin or from Vienna or from other places to Kyiv. It should become everyday practice, and this is what I think would help to master the crisis. Thank you very much for your attention.
So, questions, please. So you can still work on your questions. Maybe maybe, oh, okay. Maybe you introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you. My name is André Hattel. I'm a DRD lecturer at the Mohila Academy. Thank you very much for this presentation, which I liked very much. I think that the first book from you I read, it was not presented today, was Mariampol. This was a book I read. I like your perspective very much, although in between I was a little bit puzzled, because at first you began by saying that you can see here in the cultural space already, in the architectural space, like on the Maidan, and how it is used, what is developing here, if it comes to civil society. And then you changed a lot to an early period, the period you studied, 1920s, and so on. What I would be interested in is more what you are coming back to what you said in the beginning, that you, for a time, if I understood it correctly, you did not occupy yourself too much with Ukraine. You occupied yourself with Russia, and even those last big events for us political scientists, so those are big events if we're studying Ukraine, the Orange Revolution, and then in the neighborhood what happened in Georgia in 2008. Those were very big events, and you said you did not cover them too much. So you concentrated on Russia, what was happening inside Russia. Would you now say that, and this is my question, that the events you're seeing here, and you're studying here, the birth and the development of a civil society which might last here in Ukraine, that this does not only have the potential to remap this area here for us West Europeans, but that the developments here might have the potential to change the whole region, to change our picture of the whole region, including Russia.
I was focusing on the early period of the history because I'm a historian, and because the period of modernism, modernity, this is this period. That was the subject of my talk. But of course, I'm not only a historian, but I'm a reader of newspapers, of consumer of news, and I'm a deeply concerned scholar, I would say. I'm interested in what's happening in Ukraine, and I try to do what I can do. Yeah, and what historians or intellectuals can do is try to understand, try to describe, try to give interpretations, and to understand, and to oppose what is taking place in Germany, of course. Information war. I mean, you have to oppose the open lies of Putin's administration. You have to oppose, you have to clarify. I mean, the discussions last year, the discrimination of Russian culture in Ukraine. I mean, they could say that because nobody had an idea that Ukraine, in fact, is a bilingual country. Everybody is switching from one to the other language. So this phantoma of the Russian propaganda has to be criticized and dissolved. And I have some impressions, or I'm coming since last year several times just to follow what's going on. And yeah, but it's a long story. What is my impression? The main result for Germany, I would say, is that since the so-called crisis, Ukraine exists on the mental map of everybody. Yeah? It is not a part of Russia, it's not a part of the Soviet Union. People have understood that Ukraine is an autonomous, it's a state, it's not only a landscape related to Russia. Also, this is a main result. I would say this will go on, and writers, filmmakers have to stabilize this new map of Europe. Yeah, they have to make clear and to stabilize this new picture and map, and that it's not that's really 2 hours. In Germany, people have not yet understood that it's easy just to buy a ticket and to take a plane and to go. You don't need a visa. Yeah, it has not in the mind really arrived that it's close, and it's the same experience as 1989. Nobody knew what is Krakow. Yeah, and even in my class of intellectuals or educated people, most Western people never have been beyond. So it took time. In the 90s, they went to Poznan or to Krakow or to Vilnius, and they were amazed. Yes, Krakow, it's a European city. Yeah. So this was the amazement of educated people. And so the same will take place now. I'm convinced that events like this, exhibitions, festivals, are very, very important to bring people here. I mean, last year when people from, not only from Warsaw, but from Paris, from Amsterdam and Boston came to first time to Kyiv. Yeah? It was like an eye-opening event for them. And this we have to produce chain reactions of eye-opening experiences. Yeah? And that has to take place in the media. It has to take place in the TV. I mean, if you compare, for instance, that we have 30, 40 years now, almost every day we have a film on the Volga River, on the Yenisei, on the landscapes of Onega, which I like very much. I have all my life dealt with Russian culture, etc. But there has not been one film, I would say, about a European river like Dnipro. We have a lot of films about the Volga. Yeah. This is a representation of Russian soul. Yeah. Everybody knows about Russian soul, but Dnipro, the river which is connecting the Varyagi, the north and the Mediterranean world from the very beginning, does practically not exist. And it's not only the job of German writers or Western writers, it's also the job of Ukrainians, I would say. For instance, I had the impression in Lviv that the mayor of Lviv, he is able to do the business, to sell the city, selling the city, marketing culture, which is very, very important to bring people in, that they can learn that they are jewels of European culture, encounter, etc., etc. The same has to be done in other places. So, in Germany or in Western Europe, maybe in Germany, mostly this remapping has started, and I would say irreversibly. It has been done. It does not solve the other questions. Will we maintain the sanctions? How will we oppose the hidden or how is it called, hybrid war, etc., etc. This is also we have to. This will be a long fight. It is not decided. Yeah, and. Yeah, is it less than more, more less than more?
Hello, my name is Alexander Markov, delegate of German economy here in Ukraine. I was living in Moscow during the Medvedev times, and Medvedev, as a president in Russia, talk very much about modernization of society and about modernization of the Russian economy. There's actually an issue which is today very actual, very concrete in Ukraine also. From my personal point of view, as delegate of German economy, it's very concrete because you have to modernize Ukrainian economy that they can be a part of the European economy. And that is where I always ask myself, and I would like to learn your opinion, I always try to explain to my counterparts, it's very difficult to modernize a society if you do not know what is modernism. From my point of view, modernism is, or a part of modernism in our societies was that we understand that we only learn in a discussion, that there is no absolute opinion which is true or wrong. That is modernism, what I understand, that there is no total point of view, that everything is relative. And that is a thing, from my point of view, which is really needed, because otherwise, to modernize the society without these points of modernism, it's almost impossible. What is your opinion?
Yeah, the discourse on modernity is very complicated, and we do not have a seminar on sociology, cultural history, etc., about self-reflectivity, etc., the institutional framework. So it's hard to give a short answer. I mean, it has to do with the emergence of civil society, with self-definition, autonomy of the subjects, with emancipation, the absence of defining a total power, etc. It's a certain way of culture which is also under threat. I mean, the modernity in Germany, the silver age of Wilhelminism and Weimar culture, they have been collapsed. Modernity in one of the centers of the civil society, of modern society in Germany, has collapsed and has been the center of unbelievable things. So there is no guarantee that civil societies or modern societies will be safe for all times. Concerning what you said about there is no total or absolute view, this is in a way I agree in a certain way. In a certain way, I do not agree, because in the information war which is going on now, one of the central arguments of the Russian propaganda now is that you cannot define, that you cannot make the decision between a lie and truth, between reality and fiction. This is, I would say, even the main argument in the propaganda, that everything is relative, that everybody has right, everybody has a right on his own perspective. But I would say, in this moment, it is important to say, everybody has a right on his perspective, but we can make, and we can see the difference between reality and fiction. The вежливые люди, которые были в Крыму, они были действительно вежливые люди, войска. Это не была фикция, они не купили свои мундиры в супермаркете, они были войска. И это была настоящая стратегия сказать людям на Западе, что нет, там нет войска, это ваше преображение, это какое-то соблазн.
Fiction and lie.
Yeah, fiction and lie. So I would say it's very important to insist that you can make the difference between, that it's not only a question of interpretation, but you can say this is a fact and this is not a fact. This is fact and this is. So in the ongoing information war, and Peter Pomerantsev, I would say, had written a brilliant piece on this mainstream argument of Russia Today and the other fabrics of the Kremlin to make disappearing this difference. And I would say argue in German television today, sitting on the round table with Russian journalists, etc., it's quite hard because the organizers of these round tables, they are so cultivated, they are so virtual, so polite. They are so polite that they do not interrupt. Everybody can tell what he wants to say. He can even say that that there are not Russian military in Crimea. There is no military personnel in Donbass, despite the fact that it is clear that we have evidence.
Thank you. First of all, wanted to really to express my thankfulness for having you here, because it's a pretty unique opportunity to speak directly to you, and using this opportunity, I would like to thanks to you for your political sort of performative position, for having been clarifying for the Western or German audience lots of aspects that were typical for the so-called Russian-Ukrainian conflict, which is actually the warfare. I have a question to you as a specialist on modernism and on the modernity. It's sort of, that's why it's like a personal question. And I think you are the right person to be asked about this. So it's not so easy for the Ukrainian context, I mean, but in general, I'm really very much interested in your perspective. Because this lecture, today's lecture, is of this school organized by IVM and our center, is conducted in the framework of the School of Abducted Europe. And this abduction that we are talking about can take different forms in the Western Europe, in the Eastern Europe. So one of the most typical forms typical for the Eastern Europe, first of all, and firstly for the post-Soviet space, that this abduction of Europe takes form of the repression of modernity, the repression of modernism. I would even say the war against being modern, what it means to be modern. What I mean here? Well, first of all, it's in Ukraine today, and by the way, as well as in Russia somehow, this repression and this wiping out of modernist heritage is channeled through the process which is called now decommunization. As you know, Kuchma said that Ukraine is not Russia, but there is one common feature between these two countries. Unfortunately, there is, which is also a typical feature, I think, for the whole post-Soviet space, and that is this decommunization process. In Russia, it's channeled in the context and being realized in the situation that Putinism as ideology is throwing out, is wiping out everything from the history of the 20th century, which is mostly the Soviet history for these territories, throwing out everything which is connected somehow to revolution. That's why Putinism is anti-Maidan, right? So, because you see, now in Ukraine it's perceived, and usually the state and common sense equals Putinism to Soviet Union phenomena, which is, I think, the most stupidest mistake, which is absolutely blind, because Putinism has a lot of problems with the Soviet Union, because Soviet Union has a revolutionary start, and Putinism is a reactionary, counter-revolutionary ideology. So that's why it's like repressing everything connected with the revolution in the Soviet heritage and taking all the Stalinist monstrosity used very actively today. In Ukraine, this process is taking the form of in the field of memory fights, like which is dehumanization. So it's also because of despair or because of, I don't know, collective stupidity or whatever, because of the absence of the proper education probably. It's usually treated that if we destroy and wipe out from the public space, from the urban surface and from collective memory all the visual symbolism of the Soviet past, it would somehow oppose or counter Russian waged war, which is another mistake, of course. So I think it's like the problem here is that what should be stated clearly, especially first of all in Ukraine, that the Soviet is part of the European heritage, the Soviet phenomenon, and Soviet modernism is part of the European modernism. That's why I think your title of your lecture today is really very symptomatic, Ukraine and European modernism. So Ukraine had also its own modernism, which was the Soviet one somehow, or connected anyway to the Soviet period. And repressing this period from the history, from collective memory, trying to destroy it, it's just another way of typical today's, typical for Russia as well, overlapping or fusion or of pre-modernist approach with post-modernist approach. And this repression of modernism is like a signal that something is wrong, also in today's Ukrainian political context. So what would you say to this kind of intention or proposal that maybe the active inclusion of modernism heritage into today's reality in Ukraine under current circumstances of the warfare and occupation of the territories could indicate a possible way out from today's dead end created by the warfare? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. These are very complicated questions, and you have to solve these problems. You have to take time. You have not to hurry. They are really very complicated, and I would say that, for instance, if you take the case, I come to your question, to the core of your question, but being in Moscow last week, talking to the friends of Memorial, there's going on a competition for the memorial of the victims of Stalinist terror going on. And that means Putin is trying at the same time constructing the memorial for Vladimir the Saint at the Kremlin, Borovitskaya Varota, and he is at the same time, it will be go very fast next month, the memorial for the victims of the Stalinist terror. And we are entering the year of the October Revolution in 2 years. I think to find a synthetic, organic answer how 20th century Russian history can be interpreted it's an unbelievably complicated question. And even coming from Germany, which has a long experience in dealing with the past, with denazification, etc., I would say the case in former Soviet Union is much more complicated than the German case, which ended abruptly in 1945 with denazification organized by the occupational powers, and it took then 20 years and up to now that Germany itself started to deal with this. I have no answer to this decommunization here.
Sort of the communication as well.
Yeah, these two. When I saw one thing, I think it was in Zaporozhye. I have seen it only on a photo. There is a Lenin monument as in every place, but they gave him a yellow-blue flag around the and a scarf. And I would say this is a very good symbol for a moratorium, and it gives time for people to think about it and just to pull down, which I understand why there are some passions to do it. And we had it in Poland, we had it in Czechoslovakia, we had it also in GDR. But I understand this process of desacralizing the monuments of the past, but it's not the best way to come to terms with this unbelievably complicated history. I mean, when I was in Lviv one month ago, of course, there are these unbelievable Soviet-style Bandera memorial, 30 meters high. There are streets named after UPA people whose deeds are quite clear. I understand why they are symbol of fighting for independence against Nazi Germany and Soviet Stalinist Soviet Union, but at the same time there has been to open the space, the public space for discussion. What happened in reality? What happened in reality in Volhynia in the summer of '44? What happened in the Lviv pogrom end of July '41, etc., etc. And the same is with the communist heritage. I had the impression that Ukrainians in some places found a way to bring together the memory of the one and the other. For instance, I was in May in the Museum of the Great Patriotic War, which is a very Soviet-style, very impressive museum with details unbelievable and objects. But in the entrance hall, there was a new installation of uniforms and objects of soldiers killed now in Donbass in defending the independence of Ukraine. And I found that bringing together the memory of the terrible times of the occupation, of the German occupation, and the liberation of Kyiv from Nazi occupation, bring together this memory with the new war, the experience of war, with the victims, the sacrifice of patriots defending the country. I think this is, in my view, this was a good solution, not to antagonize the society, which cannot identify with, I would say, with one side, with Bandera on one side, and with, I don't know, with the representatives of the communist regime, which are represented in many memorials, Dzerzhinsky, Petrovsky, etc., etc. I would plead for a moratorium, for waiting, for expecting, and for calming down, because there are much more serious problems than demolishing memorials. The memorials can stay. We can pull down them in 5 years after reuniting Ukraine.
Thank you.
But these are advices from far away. It's your problem how to take away the internal strife and the aggression and the danger of splitting the Ukrainian society.
So we have maximum 10 minutes left, and I ask everybody to be short.
Okay. I'm Olena Lazarenko. I'm research at the Ukrainian National Academy of Science, the same institution as Oksana Zabushka, which you learn. And my question is concerning your experience when you're talking about your veteran of some movement, of left movement. As for me, I'm all the time like to test my academic research on my public activity in civil society. I continue to do it. It's some, for example, on corporate social responsibility, or my academic research in sphere of creativity, social action, and so on. Why you don't continue your active play in civil society of Eastern Europe or in Germany? What do you prefer? Would you like don't test it continue your activity role in the civil society movement in Europe level?
I do what I can. And my profession is to do research and to tell the story. That means to write these books about problems which are important and relevant to us, and to act in the public space as far as I have the competence to do this. This is what is my way of taking part. It's not the same way as I did in 68 or in 69 or in 70, when it was much easier to protest and it was okay, but it is a different time. And we should go to the streets. I have to say I was always waiting for a great exclamation, the outcry of the European intelligentsia. I was waiting for an article in the style of Émile Zola, J'accuse, after the attack on Ukraine. And I had the feeling that there is a kind of bécilie, of helplessness in opposing and defining what is going on. And I mean, we have brilliant and wonderful intellectuals I admire, but they had not the words to do it. They are not they are not cowards. They are not cowards. But the problem was to find the language, to find the words, to denominate what is going on. And how could you take part in a discussion if you did not know anything about Ukraine? I mean, it was a problem. It was even a problem for people like me. I had, in the first discussions, there was a discussion on discrimination of Russian language, etc. And we have to look at statistics. We have to learn what's going on. I mean, there have been people like Andreas Kappel and others from Vienna, and people who lived here. They knew from the very first moment that all this is rubbish, this is propaganda, and it's wrong. But the general suspicion that something could be right in discrimination, something could be right with nationalism, private sector, something could be right with anti-Semitism. Yeah, this was this is a kind of mood or spirit in the public sphere, which to dissolve and to oppose and to destroy takes very much energy. And I would say we are not at the end of this fight. Yeah, now it's going on. I mean, Putin save us. These slogans have been on the demonstrations in Dresden. Yeah, among people from national, from ordinary citizens, from Russian Germans, emigres coming from Russia to Germany, from former Stasi security people. This is a very interesting mixture which is emerging, and the Russian propaganda is playing with this like virtuoso. Yeah. So the battle is going on, and we do what we can.
Okay, unfortunately our time is running out. We have to finish our event, also because we have to empty this space very soon. It's going to be closed. So I would like to thank you for coming and for your excellent questions. I would also like to thank Professor Шльоґель for his lecture, for the inspiring discussion, for coming to Kyiv, being with us, and also staying with us all these difficult times. Thank you very much.